Welcome back to the Human Nexus podcast. My name is Andrew Brazis. I'm a marketing and business consultant and private chef.
Welcome back. My name is Miss Laura Machiste. I am a YouTube tarot reader, holistic massage therapist, and energy coach. And today we have a guest on.
Hi, everyone. My name is Zoe Scurletis. I am a therapist and podcast host, and I currently live in Austin, Texas.
Thank you so much for coming on, Zoe. Right before this, we were talking about your trip in Spain. Sorry,
Mm,
Portugal. I don't know how to
both.
use
Yeah,
both.
both.
Can you
Yeah.
kind of share that experience a little bit just to start us off?
Yeah. So when I graduated high school, which was now over 10 years ago, um, I randomly decided, I mean, it wasn't my idea, it was a like a friend found it to do the Camino de Santiago, which is a Catholic pilgrimage to Santiago de Compostela in Spain. There's a lot of different routes. The most common being there's like a route. I, mm, I actually don't know where the main one starts. I think the French route, which is the most common one, starts in like southwest France, and then you make your way to Santiago de Compostela. My friends and I did the Portuguese route, which we started in Porto, and made our way up to Santiago de Compostela. It took, I want to say 11 days. We stayed like one extra day in one of the small towns in Portugal. And I say it was random because there were five of us and only one of us was Catholic, my boyfriend at the time. And even, I mean, he was Catholic, but he wasn't like practicing Catholic. And I come from a bi-religious, I don't know, multi-religious household. My mom is Jewish, my dad is Greek Orthodox. I was raised, my parents say religious, what do they say? Culturally, we celebrate everything and practice nothing is like kind of the motto they did. When they got married, they made an agreement that there would be no bat mitzvahs and no baptisms. That was like their handshake of, let you decide kind of where
Yeah.
you want to go. And then this was after I graduated from an Episcopalian high school. So really all over the map when it comes to things I absorbed or like specific, I guess, ideologies. And then I did this Catholic pilgrimage with my boyfriend at the time, my friend Lucy, my friend David and his sister Adele. And we started in Porto, and it was like anywhere from like 15 to 30 kilometers of walking a day. And you would stay in albergues, which are free hostels for pilgrims. And I mean, to this day, it was like, I still look back and I'm like, can't believe my parents let me do that. This was pre Google Maps, pre uh, no, we didn't have like SIM cards. We didn't have anything. I really can't believe my parents just were like, sure, yeah, go hike for 12 days with your, other 18-year-old friends. And it was such an amazing experience. It was, I think, probably the most spiritual of an experience for my boyfriend at the time because his mom had relatively recently been diagnosed with terminal lung cancer. And he also grew up Catholic. His mom was like very, very Catholic. And so I just remember I kind of was a firsthand witness to him having this really magical experience of, you're walking for 12 hours a day, not really talking. The first day you kind of are talking a lot with everyone. After a while, you're like, okay, we've touched on everything and we have 11 more days of this. But just witnessing him kind of go through that motion and, we would stay at these hostels and there would be priests there and we'd just talk with them about what the pilgrimage meant for them. And, they were all like very confused when they learned that these random five Americans were deciding to do this Catholic pilgrimage and none of us were Catholic or like one of us was. And then we got to this beautiful cathedral at the end, and it was like, I mean, for one thing, I just remember like getting there and like my calves were huge just because like we were walking so much. And, you had like this little what's the word? Like a little passport and you'd get stamped at each albergue you'd stay at. And it was such an amazing accomplishment to finish there and to see this just beautiful cathedral that's been around for years and years. And yeah, I mean, again, it's like been over 10 years now, and I still think it's like the coolest thing I've ever done in my life. And I hope to one day go back and do a different route by myself or with a different crew of people. There's a book called the is it called The Camino? I don't know. There's a book by Paulo Coelho about it, the author of The Alchemist. And then there's also a movie with Martin Sheen. And I remember watching the movie with my family and my ex-boyfriend, and it was really emotional because like the movie is about a man whose son does the Camino and dies on the trip, and then Martin Sheen goes out and does the trip as well to kind of feel connected to his son and to like finish what his son wasn't able to do. So that movie's called The Way, and it was just an emotional experience all for so many reasons, like exiting such a transformative chapter of high school, going into college, seeing my boyfriend then just go through the process of almost like anticipatory grief, and then soon losing his mom after. And yeah, it's one of those experiences like being 18 and doing that, you don't really appreciate how transformative it is. And then you can look back and be like, wow, I can't believe I did that when I was so
Yeah.
young.
Do
A
you feel
really
like there's something that like stood out to you on that trip that really brought you to a different level of spirituality, or is it more or less you have the awareness now than you did before? Like, is there anything that just like stood out to you that this trip brought about that other experiences didn't?
I think for one thing, it really taught me to become how to be comfortable in silence. Um, I think most people are uncomfortable in silence. It's like a weird experience. You feel like you need to fill up this space. And then but when you're, hiking with the same four other people for 12 days, and we did the shortest route, like the main route is like 35 days or something. So you really are kind of forced to just walk with people. And, I don't remember how listening to like music. I I think I listened to one audiobook. Maybe it was like the first ever audiobook I listened to, but that probably only took 2 days. And so I think just after a while, just like walking in tandem with people and, at different paces, some days like I would usually at the time walk with my boyfriend for the whole segment. But sometimes, my friend and his sister would get there earlier and then we'd arrive and kind of all grab some tapas. And so it was a cool thing. Like, I mean, I had no idea what else in my life, like, or I guess how the rest of my life would play out and how much I'd look back on this experience, especially given other things that I've like some cards I've been dealt later in life. And now being a therapist, it's, you have to be really comfortable in silence and not just fill the space in a session. So I'd say like there's certain things that stood out in terms of I remember like this like just one segment where we weren't talking and like actually being at peace with that in the moment. But now I think I look back more holistically and just see, wow, like it was very symbolic of like now what a lot of my life is, which is a weird, you know, I guess kind of thing to think about considering obviously at the time, you're young, you think the whole world is your oyster and everything is going to be amazing, and then you get dealt some like more challenging cards. And it's pretty cool that I had that to like tap back into in those more difficult moments.
I guess my question is, what was your life like? I mean, growing up in like I don't know, a multi-religious home and then doing that experience and then after, like, how do you navigate religion or spirituality?
Yeah, it's very really it's been an interesting like part of my life. And again, like I think most of this has been looked back on and processed all in hindsight, because so my dad was raised Greek Orthodox, my mom was raised Jewish. And when they got married, and like, I honestly didn't even learn this until, I don't know, maybe 5, 10 years ago. My dad was forced to leave the church, like legally, I guess, or not legally, by Greek Orthodoxy standards. If marry outside of the religion, you're not allowed to get married in the church. You're really even not allowed to be like a godfather to anyone. Um, so it was quite a big thing for my dad to do, especially because his closest family is all very like religious. They have these huge Greek Easter parties. It's like very like my big fat Greek wedding. Um, and then my mom was Jewish, and then I also grew up in Rumson, New Jersey. If you know anything about it, it's a very wealthy town and on the Jersey Shore, predominantly Catholic, or I guess Irish, yeah, like Irish Catholic, Italian Catholic. Like everyone in my school was either Italian or Irish. And then I think there were maybe like two, I went to like two bat mitzvahs ever, you know? And so there was really no one who had my experience growing up. I went to so many, oh my gosh, what are they called? Confirmations. Like in the only bat mitzvahs I went to were friends of from summer camp, which is like there's a lot of Jewish people who go to summer camp. So I felt very kind of disconnected to religion in general when I was younger. I celebrated, Christmas. We'd always celebrate Hanukkah, but it was more of like time for gifts as opposed to time for reflection. And I really only ever like I remember like I actually have such a specific memory of like the first time I prayed. It was like I want to say eighth grade maybe, and our family friends, like who they had this really big family, and the dad had kind of suddenly died or like had cancer, and it metastasized very quickly, and then he passed away. And I remember like I just very specifically remember praying. I don't know to what or like to whom, um, but I just have that memory of like, am I doing this right? Because again, like I had like no real model of what religion was supposed to look like. And then my family moved to Athens, Greece, my freshman year of high school. Again, another really culturally immersive experience. Not really specifically religious, but I do remember praying each night that I remember praying for my grandparents and my dog because we left our dog at home. And um, an interesting like thing that happened with that was we, spent over a year there, maybe like 11 months actually. And we got back and my dog ended up dying like the day after we got back. So he like made it just in time for us to like take him to be put down. And I don't know, I always think about that because I still struggle to even articulate like what I fully believe. And but I do remember just like praying every night that Lucky, my dog, would live. And then miraculously he did barely, but we did get to say goodbye to him. And then I enrolled in a Episcopalian boarding school. So of the religions I am familiar with, that one is like the closest. I could say like the Lord's Prayer. I remember just like we had two required chapels a week. And, it was again something now in hindsight, I'm like, I can't believe my mom agreed to that. We had this whole like no baptisms, no bat mitzvahs. And then I'm enrolled in an Episcopalian boarding school where I was the designated class Jew, which is maybe not to completely politically correct looking back. But that was again interesting because I was once again this kind of outsider of like attending these ceremonies, saying the Lord's Prayer, kind of skipping the uh, communion. And then I went to a college where a lot of my friends were actually Jewish, which was like the first time in my life there had been a lot of Jewish people near me or in my area. So all this is to say is like, I don't know, now I'm 29, I live in Austin, and I'd say I have friends of like all religions, although and it's actually interesting because like when I moved back here, because I've been back and forth from New York and Austin over the past 5 years, when I moved back in October, one of the things I really thought about was like building a community or like a spiritual community and looking into like Unitarian churches or something that could give me this sense of like, I don't want to say purpose, like a sense of community with a common theme. Um, because of like having that kind of gap in my life for so long and like not having a northern star, and simultaneously also in my grad school, I learned a lot about the importance of having something to believe in and how, you know, there have been studies that show people who are religious, like if like have longer or a higher percentage of survival from cancer and like live longer because they have hope in some higher power. And I thought that was like one of my favorite classes was the religion and spirituality and mental health. And so it's something I think I still grapple with and I'm still trying to find an answer to, but I also think that that's kind of the purpose is like looking to something for an answer is like spirituality in general. So yeah, that was a lot of rambling, but that's kind of been the trajectory of my life and how religion has and has not played a part.
Did you always want to be a therapist, or did something specific happen that you were more or less in a position of like, oh, wow, this is what I want to do, this is who I want to be, and kind of bring you to that point? Or was that just something you wanted to do your whole life?
Yeah, so I actually never in a million years thought I would be a therapist. I both my parents were on Wall Street, did the whole banking thing, and I kind of just thought I would be doing the same thing. Studied engineering in college and with the my sights set on either banking or consulting, ended up in financial consulting for 2.5 years. But it was actually my senior year of college, a very close friend of mine from high school took his life. And that like rocked me. Just, I mean, that second semester of my senior year is like a blur. It's interesting now looking back as like I just completely dissociated in hindsight. And I mean, speaking of like a religious experience, he was like a huge or spiritual experience. He was a huge runner and I got really into running and like that's the closest to spirituality I've ever felt is like going on these runs and getting a runner's high and feeling like connected to my friend Alex. I remember being on spring break in Cabo, which is like so hilarious. But I remember going on this run and getting to this like beautiful peak and like that was the closest I've ever felt to quote unquote like God or something was just standing on this rock and like crying and like remembering him, feeling the sun on me and being like, wow, this feels out of body. And so all that is to say is like, while at that point I still didn't make a connection to becoming a therapist, I that's what sparked my passion for mental health awareness. And so while I was working in finance, I started a mental health podcast. And that's how I found Andrew was like to help me build my website for the podcast. And then it was June of 2020. I was interviewing a psychologist and she was talking to me and she was like, well, you'd be a good therapist. Like, that's kind of what you're doing with this podcast. And it was like a light bulb went off of like, wow, that makes a lot of sense. But, in at least where I went to college, there was like kind of three roads you could go down. It was finance, consulting, or doctor. And then like no one tells you that there's so many other options of like what to do with your life. And so we finished the interview. I was like, please, can you be my therapist? And then she was my coach, helped me apply to grad school. And so the rest is history, but it was a very like beautiful journey to becoming to where I am now. And obviously like from the depths of grief, like I would have preferred a different route to have become this and for my friend to still be alive, but it is a very interesting like I don't know, at the times I think about like the butterfly effect a lot and just kind of how one little thing can be so transformative in your life. And just, now I'm a therapist, like working with clients who have dealt with grief. And, it's never in a million of years would I have like in those like times where I was grieving my friend, been like thought that this would be where I would have been in, 6, 7 years or however long it's been. But yeah, it's a long-winded way of saying I did not know I was going to be a therapist. And it's been a very interesting journey to getting here, but now it feels very like where I've been meant to be.
Yeah, it sounds like it's super aligned. I mean, just from like just the way you're talking about it.
Yeah, I mean, it's so just crazy because I growing up, like, again, kind of never in a million years thought I would be in this. I mean, growing up, I didn't even have a therapist, which was a mistake. I should have, like, from a young age. And then, like, I was kind of bribed by my parents to first see a therapist in college. And then now here I am, like, with a caseload of 20-ish clients, and it's incredibly rewarding, incredibly challenging, but also there's like, yeah, there's so much alignment between like the podcast that I have been running for 5 years now, and um the work I do, and I also am like a big reader, and so I feel like a lot of what I pull from is like from books and I've read and podcasts I've listened to. And it's also interesting just like thinking some of my clients and where the overlap of spirituality plays a part in their life, because I have some clients who have dealt with so much trauma and so much grief that they really have lost a sense of hope. And they kind of feel like, well, how can there be a God when, I've lost three relatives in the span of 3 years? Like, and it's like, yeah, that's a good point, like that seems incredibly unfair. And yet, on the other hand, there's also clients I've had who are very much of the mindset of like, well, I had this happen and this happened and this happened, but like that had to happen because everything happens for a reason. And so there's a lot of the spiritual viewpoints are all over the map.
That's
You,
awesome that you're able to like give them that space to kind of like figure it out in a way that maybe wasn't always available to you in a sense, and being like that person for other people, I feel like is so important.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like on one hand, I'm so grateful for the way my parents raised me. Like I much would have preferred that than feeling um like my partner right now like had a very opposite experience where he grew up in a very religious community of like kind of everyone was of one mindset, and he was, a part of that, and like had to kind of quote unquote like break out of that religion as a young adult and kind of find purpose in other ways and feel in some ways like disconnected to his like family and community because of having a different way of thinking. And like, I'm sure there's some positives, but it sounds very challenging in the way he describes it. And then I had I feel very lucky that I was able to kind of forge my own path and, and understand or like figure out what I like, what I don't like, and what feels in alignment with me and what feels disconnected. Like for example, this past summer, I went to Indonesia for 2 months and did like a whole yoga training, and I learned a lot about Hindu philosophy, which weirdly is like so similar to psychotherapy, and just in the sense of like dreams and like learning from your past and having a purpose, and um the three I'm forgetting a lot of it, but like the three different paths you can go down, one of them being like I think it's the like the three, I think it's karmas maybe. um but that really resonated with me a lot of learning Hindu philosophy and just the parallels to what I do for work. And so even just that exposure in itself was such a good indication of like, not that I'd call myself Hindu or call myself like a Buddhist, but I definitely feel a more aligned with maybe Eastern religions than from what I know about Episcopalianism.
do you have any like practices now, like daily, weekly, monthly that you do to keep you, I don't know, or like are they, I mean, I'm sure they're evolving if you are doing them.
They're definitely evolving. I'd say the biggest one is yoga, which like one of my biggest takeaways from this program was that you can't separate yoga from Hinduism. Like yoga is inherently a Hindu practice, and so if you're quote unquote practicing yoga, you are practicing Hinduism. Um, Granted, that's for like what my philosophy professor said. Who knows if other people disagree? I don't want to speak for everyone. But I thought that was really interesting, and just knowing, the ways in which yoga has been appropriated and westernized. Like, I've been to like hit yoga classes and it's like, okay, is that Hinduism? Maybe not, but I think just the notion of being one with your body and being very present is like, at least right now, my main goal and focus of like, I don't know, I just read The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, which is um felt very aligned with like what I learned about yoga, what I learned about Hinduism, and honestly what I try to teach clients of just being present and not letting your thoughts clutter everything. And so I think that's just another like weird thing to think about in hindsight is how much my profession aligns with these like aspects of myself that I never fully developed as a kid in terms of spirituality, religion, all those things, because a lot of like dialectical behavior therapy, for example, like one of the four core components is mindfulness, like there's such a main tenet that is rooted in spirituality or at the very least meditation and presence, which were things that were never talked about in my household growing up.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
totally relate to that because I had to go down a whole different path to like figure out what is my body really doing? What's the energy that's really holding? What is the power inside? And I know I'm going back a little bit, but there's something you said about feeling connected to your friend who took his life when you got the runner's high and felt
Hmm.
connected. So I love that you said that because that's exactly what I teach people about hormones and stuff like that. Like when they come to my practice, and it's so interesting to hear that from you, from something that you just kind of experienced and felt called to do, and kind of figuring out your own connection to self through grief, which is, I feel like, one of the biggest things that people don't understand to do. They'll like suck it down with them, or they'll find that way to bring themselves up, which is kind of what you did in a sense. Although you felt that release, it was though it was all the love coming through and coming out and stuff like that. So it's just like really awesome to hear like what you went through growing up in terms of kind of how awesome your parents didn't put one religion on you. I love that as well. Kind of like giving you the openness to figure it out, as well as you having the connection to the body, mind, and soul and doing all of these things in different countries. I mean, that's awesome. That's really, really great.
Yeah, I got the travel bug from my mom. She like spent a year in Thailand teaching English to Cambodian refugees, and she's trekked through Nepal. Funny because also growing up, she was like, I'm culturally Jewish but religiously Buddhist. And I was like, okay, whatever that means. Um, but yeah, it's interesting. Like also, I think Andrew, when you said, what is, if anything, what I've kind of practiced now. I don't, while this isn't like necessarily a practice, is like I do find a lot of solace in signs or just like weird occurrences or like I don't know. I'll give an example. So my friend, the one who passed away, was a huge Eagles fan, like biggest like Eagles fan. Whole family was were like Eagles. And, he passed away December 24th, 2017. And, maybe less than 2 months later, the Eagles win their first ever Super Bowl. To say I was a mess on that day is an understatement. I was sobbing. Then fast forward, we get to, 2025, which is 7 years after he's died. His birthday was October 7th. His number on his cross country was 7, and the Eagles win again. And so things like that, maybe it's a stretch. The like logical part of me is like, okay, it's coincidence, but the part of me that needs it is says, that's a wild coincidence. And
Mhm.
it's pretty special to think that, his team wins 7 years after, they won last time, which was right after he passed away. And so little things like that, just like, I don't know. Maybe I definitely get that from my mom. My mom's like a big signs person. And what just finding the little small meanings, I think is kind of like going back to the whole notion of why spirituality is so important for mental health of some sort is because like little things like that give you hope and that like not all is lost, or at least like there's some higher purpose or some, someone out there, whether it's God or, Mother Earth or whatever you want to call it, or even just like a loved one who's deceased is showing you like things are still okay. So I definitely am I volunteer at this grief camp and they make these like they have a really big TikTok following because they kind of add humor to grief. And there's this one video they did that's like when you're at grief camp and you see a butterfly and it's like kids just like all running towards this butterfly because they're like finding the humor in the fact that yeah, like my mom thinks her dad is in the form of an owl somewhere, and every time we see an owl, it's like, oh, it's Grandpa Bob, or like, my dad thinks of his mom as a dove, and so I don't know, even if realistically it's silly, it still I think brings a lot of hope and solace and kind of beauty to something that's profoundly sad.
I think
The
too,
observation of signs is big.
yeah, I
Hmm.
think that's something that's like universal, like across. I mean, I have my own version of that. Laura also had, I mean, Laura, you can speak to this, I'm sure, but
Please.
uh
The signs
uh,
I get, I can't.
yeah, and it's like it happens. Like just the conversation we've had on this podcast, like it's happening for everybody, and it's like
Hmm.
perceived in their own way, and it's so weird because it's like this thing that like you just explained, like it happens and we're like aware of it, but we can't quite explain why or like the connection we're making there. And it does like it sounds silly to the outside, like to everybody like who's not involved, but like once I don't know, Laura, like we've had things where we're like, oh shit, like it's like kind of like similar, I don't know, experiences, but it's just really cool. So thanks for sharing that.
Even the
Yeah.
connection to what she's like a lot of our guests have been saying, specifically a lot of ones that have come from Andrew so far. I even find that there is like weird resonance in the signs and in the way that they're perceived, like the Eagles winning the Super Bowl after your friend passing away. I actually have a similar resonance of a sign with that too. And the only reason why it's so strong is because it was the first person that ever passed away in my like immediate family. So, like you always like remember the
Yeah.
firsts of things. And he was a huge Giants fan. And like there was Giants, like it was like a shrine to them in the basement. And when he passed away, the Super Bowl that came after, he passed away on Christmas Eve. And then the Super Bowl in February, the Giants played and they won it. So that was actually one of my first correlating signs to where I was like, well, that's weird. And now you're saying yours. So it's not a stretch because that's actually like one of my first things. And I think I was only like, well, I don't know, I was really young. So I would say maybe I was like 8 years old.
Yeah, that's the same day my friend died, was Christmas Eve. Like that in itself is
Really? Oh my gosh. That's
Mhm.
creepy. That's even weirder. Okay, see,
Yeah.
there you go. This is why continue your story. The weird things stop follow me all the time.
Yeah. It's
Oh gosh,
it's
that's
like
crazy.
how do you explain that? I mean it's
Wow.
yeah, it's weird. And I I think like yeah, it was like shortly after my grandpa died, this owl got stuck in our house. Like, like also where did it come from? I've never seen an owl in real life. And then all of a sudden this owl's just like stuck in our house and can't leave. So things like that. It's also like at the end of the day, there's I was talking about this like yesterday, just thinking of like the universe and just how massive it is and how little we know about it. It's like if that's possible, if it's possible that like we're perfectly distanced from the sun to sustain life, yet not too close to burn up, which is like, there's all the also like the magic, uh, what is it? The
But
fraction, the
it's
magic
it's it's like the golden ratio or like the
golden
golden zone. Yeah.
ratio. Like if that stuff's all true, then like there's no, like, it's totally possible that my grandpa is existing in some owl. Like that's kind of how I see it at the end of the day is like there's so much we can't prove. So like this could, be as inexplicable as just the universe in itself.
That could have been your grandpa also coming through in a way of like, this is how I need you to pay attention to me. Like in
Hmm.
owl symbolism, I feel like a lot of times when they pass over, they choose something. And they'll, I feel like a lot of times they try to choose something that's familiar to them when they were here on Earth, so you kind of can know. But the fact that an owl got stuck after his passing is probably a big thing of kind of like, hey, this is how I'm going to be coming in. Remember this energy for like future and stuff like that. Because I've had a bunch of experiences. My mom has had a dream of like my dad who told her something that she didn't know and then told me. And I was like, well, how'd you know that? So there's
Yeah.
just there's a lot of things. So I'm sure there's a lot of energy around you where they're trying to like give you as much signs as possible and just hopes that you can like connect them, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting too, like even just thinking about those symbols that whether like we choose or they choose of I don't know, they're all flying, it's like butterflies, birds, owls. I mean, even as I was saying that, I was like eagles, like I
Yeah.
don't know, it was a flying team. And so it's just interesting how that all shows up. And, we did like a my at this grief camp on like the last day when the parents came to pick up the kids. It was actually like it's kind of a weird, I don't know. It went better than we expected. They gave us like all of these little, I don't know, this company does this thing where they ship you butterflies in little packets, and then you open the little envelope and the butterflies all fly. And the whole time all the counselors were freaking out because we're like, what if they didn't make it? And then we just are like releasing these dead bugs like in the
Oh my
air.
God.
But somehow it was pretty, it was nice. And I don't know, even just like that symbolism in itself was to kind of just encompass like the joy that exists in tandem with grief that we don't sometimes see it or we don't even like allow it because it feels weird to experience joy and grief at the same time. But at the end of the day, like that's just the duality of life is like two things can coexist. And I think the more we kind of lean into the joys, the way that we can manage or like push through the grief or at least allow it to pass.
Yeah, it's the body. It's when you
Yeah.
like you laugh so hard that you cry, or you're crying and you're so mad about something that you all of a sudden start laughing and you're like, I have no idea why I'm laughing. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's pretty cool. And I think too, just like, I don't know, seeing kids experience it was also really, I mean, incredibly sad, but also kind of beautiful because these little kids, were able to tap into joy and like and find humor. And I remember this one girl wrote like on her little uh like at the last day, like everyone wrote luminaries, and like wrote, little letters to their loved ones on these candle bags. And then like we like one by one you lit your candle and put it there. And she's 9, and so hers said like it was something really sad of like, dad, like why did you like have to not keep skipping the hospital or like not go to the doctor? And then it was like too hot to be dead. And we're like
Oh my God.
just like I don't know, kids are so funny because they say the things that adults are, too proud to articulate or like censor themselves. And whereas, she just articulated too beautiful or like something so beautiful and painful while also then just like bringing the humor of being a 9-year-old.
Right.
Yeah, that's actually really fun. I mean, really sad, but kind of really funny too. Add anything about Souls in the City? Like any connections there?
I had like a psychic medium on once. I'm trying to think of like of if there was anything really profound she said. I don't really even honestly remember when that was. I'm trying to think. I think just like, I don't know, my biggest takeaway from this the podcast was, I mean, it's hard to say the biggest takeaway. At the end of the day, it's like what allowed me to find my career. So that's probably the biggest takeaway. But I don't know. I think like, and I'm sure, y'all like also find this is just you learn so much through speaking with people for an hour. And I think like, I don't know, I think conversation is a lost art. And to be able to talk about whether it's grief, whether it's anxiety, whether even it's like I've had clients talk about times in their life when they were suicidal or like dealing with bipolar disorder and having manic episodes, like these things that are seem so wildly like, uncomfortable to bring up, and then you record them and speak them into existence, and all of a sudden it's like much more tangible and much easier to speak about and a lot less scary. I do think that's like one of the most beautiful parts of podcasting, of, and can be brought into any conversation. It doesn't have to be recorded. But I think that's just, I don't know, in itself been a spiritual practice, I guess, is being able to have these long conversations with strangers and leave them feeling like I A, learned something, I B, feel connected to someone, and C, I probably like not only learned something about them or what they've taught me, but also learned something about myself. So, yeah, I guess in a way, like maybe, I mean, y'all, maybe you guys can speak to this, but I feel like podcasting is a pretty spiritual experience, just of the connections you make with people and the ways you can, like, I don't know, leave feeling like you learned a lot about something else, someone else, and yourself.
I love how something you did as like a just a thing on the side or something you did in your free time ended up bringing you to your purpose. Because I say that all the time in readings. I'm like, and especially the fact that a therapist actually said to you that you'd be a good therapist. That's also another thing I'm always honing in on. I'm like, you do not know what someone's one or two sentence can say to you, and it can change your whole life. So you're a very big testament to that.
Yeah, it's so true. And I think also when things like that happen, and like, I don't know, especially working with clients who are like, I don't know what I'm doing with my life, like I hate my career. It's like, yeah, think of the time someone said something to you where you felt something in your body that felt really like grounded, whether it was like a comment on your, you know, personality, like, I mean, something positive, like a positive feeling, but it's like, oh, wow, you are a really good listener, or wow, you're, really intellectual, or, like, and then connect that to maybe a profession or a hobby or something, because I feel like there is some gut feeling that we can tap into and listen to. And it can lead us to somewhere really beautiful. And yeah, I like am very fortunate to be a testament of that.
Yeah, that's
Well,
great.
it was lovely having you on today.
Yeah, thank you
Thank
so
you.
much, Zoe. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Yeah, so where can we find you on like what's your podcast? Is it on Instagram? Is it on YouTube? Is it on Spotify? Is it everywhere?
Mostly Spotify and Apple Podcasts. It's called Solace and the City. And then if you're in New York or Texas and need a therapist, I'm taking on new clients.
Perfect. So we can link Zoe's link down below for you have a website, right? Yeah. So we'll link your website for clients and Spotify and Apple for the podcast. And thank you so much for sharing your story. It was beautiful to hear and to connect to. And hopefully, a lot of you also feel the same way. If you have any similar experience, to let us know in the comments below. And we'll see you next time.